There had been a lot of conjecture surrounding Buckingham Palace for weeks. Every action, every picture, and every absence captured the attention of royal observers. Dinner tables and media outlets were both filled with whispers. There was a problem. However, nobody was prepared for what followed. The palace finally spoke a minute ago, and the country is in shock over what it showed. In front of a surprised press corps, King Charles and Prince William came, their accents husky and their features gloomy. Not only was the taboo around Princess Kate's illness broken, it exploded. Furthermore, her condition has a far more sad origin than anyone could have ever imagined. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. It started at Clarence House with an unexpected media call and an unusual, urgent press conference. Senior royal correspondents were taken by surprise as well. King Charles came forward as the cameras went live. No notes were prepared, no teleprompter. Simply a serious look and eyes that appeared cloudier than normal. As he spoke to the country, his voice broke. "I never thought I would have to say this. For years, the monarchy had taught itself to avoid this kind of vulnerability. And yet, here it was, painful, unvarnished, and real." Prince William then arrived. He initially stood up next to his father. However, the fissures appeared shortly after he gave his speech. His voice trailed off. In an attempt to steady his hands, he grasped the lectern's edge. Then he said, "My wife's condition has taken a tragic turn." He came to a halt. No headline could ever overpower his stillness. He blinked quickly, fighting the need to cry. And he trembled as he concluded the phrase after what felt like an eternity of silence. "We're also bracing ourselves for the worse." It went beyond a simple admission. It was an admission. How long had the royal family known? Nobody was aware of it yet. However, the weight of the words they alluded to, the tone of the statements, and the truth that had been hidden for far too long under image control and royal protocol. One thing was evident despite the hazy details. Kate's condition was not getting better. It had actually reached a crucial and potentially irreversible point. Public appearances had been reduced for months. Engagements were discreetly called off. However, the palace maintained that she was choosing to be out of the spotlight in order to recover and recharge. All those certainties vanished now, like morning mist. Social media took off. News anchors hardly managed to remain calm. Global headlines descended, each attempting to interpret the royal family's ultimate confirmation. However, more queries surfaced. Why now? Why the lengthy wait? Was the public misinformed by the palace? Was there a more profound rationale behind the revealing of this particular moment? Charles and William's emotional collapse indicated not only sadness but also strife. This was not merely a health issue. Trust was at issue. About a monarchy struggling to preserve honor in the face of impending doom. However, in order to really comprehend the significance of this event, we need to take a close look at the silent suffering, internal royal conflicts, and well-planned cover-ups that led us to this point. Palace insiders whispered of emergency meetings, doctor trips at midnight, and a widening rift behind gilded doors, despite the cameras showing a happy princess. The woman who was acclaimed as the future queen was engaged in a personal conflict about a monarchy struggling to preserve honor in the face of impending doom. However, in order to really comprehend the significance of this event, we need to take a close look at the silent suffering, internal royal conflicts, and well-planned cover-ups that led us to this point. Palace insiders whispered of emergency meetings, doctor trips at midnight, and a widening rift behind gilded doors, despite the cameras showing a happy princess. The woman who was acclaimed as the future queen was engaged in a personal conflict, and disease wasn't the only enemy she faced. They were terror, might, and quiet. The audience witnessed a well-planned performance, a few appearances, A smile here, a wave there. However, the truth was leaking out of Kensington's magnificent gates more quickly than anyone could stop it. According to reports, Catherine passed out during a private engagement 2 months before to the palace's announcement, a charity visit that was never published by the media. Employees were told to inform guests that she was suffering from a migraine. In actuality, though, she was unconscious for more than 20 minutes. The first clear indication that something was badly amiss was that occurrence. Kate fully disappeared from the public spotlight shortly after. It started off as minor occasions that were discreetly taken out of her itinerary, truncated or postponed appearances. According to palace sources, she was just recharging, concentrating on personal responsibilities or spending time with family. But when demand mounted, these justifications started to fall apart. Employees in the castle started talking quietly. There were rumors of private ambulances, medical equipment arriving late at night, and doctors who were flown in from Switzerland and were experts in unusual neurological problems and degenerative diseases. Strict non-disclosure agreements were in place when each expert arrived, and they all departed without being publicly acknowledged. There was a cold war simmering inside the palace. William wanted the truth to be known. He thought the public ought to be informed. Senior aides, however, advised moderation. Their logic? The monarchy isn't a medical facility. The crown needs to stay steady. William was enraged. According to reports, he abruptly left a meeting with the communications team when they insisted on changing their messaging. He was caught between his obligation to the throne and his duty to his wife. Charles was also torn. Above all, he had learned one thing during decades of preparation for the throne. Because it controls the narrative, the royal family is able to survive. Transparency was perilous to him. The public required poise, not hysteria. However, this was a personal tragedy rather than a national scandal, and in that space between obligation and feeling. Charles paused. Camilla stepped into that hesitation. Palace insiders claimed that she advocated for moderation in order to maintain the appearance of control, as well as for the sake of the crown. Another Diana incident is not what we need, she reportedly told one of her aides. Many family members believed Camilla was more focused on appearances than on Kate. As Charles's uncertainty increased, her effect on him got stronger, escalating tensions in the already precarious household. Kate, meanwhile, was quietly declining. Her spirit was slowly being killed by the strain to maintain a smile for the cameras and to be acceptable. She was being suffocated by the silence instead of being protected by it. Despite this, she always posed next to William in royal photos, her lips slightly curled and her chin up. But there were nights when she couldn't tolerate it behind closed doors. There were times when she had trouble remembering things. No title could stop the sobbing coming from behind soundproof walls. The children were a critical component that the palace overlooked while planning what to say and when. Another storm was building while Kate's health declined in the background, not in her physical body, but in her children's imaginations, who were silently getting ready for the unimaginable. How do you tell kids that their mom might not get better, that she might give fewer hugs and speak in a gentler tone? She didn't have much time. Born royal heirs are Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. However, only youngsters were drawn into a world that was too harsh for their naive souls. The palace anticipated this time. However, the weight of what was to be stated could not be lessened by any amount of preparation. The oldest George, had already detected a serious problem. Teachers at his school had observed a significant shift in his behavior in the weeks preceding the public declaration. He was no longer as talkative. His previously curious spirit waned as he became less involved. Replaced by extended periods of silence and a persistent gaze toward the gates during pickup time, as if expecting to see a familiar face that had vanished. Tension was high inside Kensington's walls. The children's constant companion, Nanny Maria, revealed in secret that the nights had grown intolerable. She apparently informed a close friend that there are times when she sobs quietly, from behind sealed doors as well as from the kids. Comfort and sleep had become elusive. Their mother's kiss and bedtime story had transformed into a shaky vow spoken through closed eyes. But what Kate herself had done in secret may say more about the anguish than anything else. She had written private letters to each of her children, since she was aware that her illness could rob her of time and moments she would never be able to reclaim. Not read out loud, not talked about, simply written, sealed, and kept out of sight. A last mother's touch for a future she will never witness, she feared. Words for when she might not be there, but they would need her the most. William was aware that there was no more time to wait. He took George for a walk one cold morning. No protection, not a single camera, only a father and son. According to palace insiders, he told him at this very moment, what was said stays between them. But after they got back, George remained silent for the remainder of the day, and his youth seemed to fade a bit. Always the sensitive one, Charlotte had started to object to sleeping in her own bed. She took her mother's pillow every night, curled up outside the bedroom door, and asked if she could wait for her to return. She held on to rituals, smells, and tiny traces that brought her memories of her mother. It was a child's desperate attempt to cling to time, love, and something that was disappearing too quickly. Even the youngest Louis had started to feel something. Even if his comprehension was limited, the shifts in tone, the silence in discussions, and the looks shared above his head all contributed to a web of anxiety. He would keep asking, "Mummy, where are you?" And even if there were explanations, there was never any serenity. In the background, the crown was following established procedures to get royal children ready for their parents' absence. They contacted psychologists. There were briefings. However, no title or training could protect a youngster from heartache. The weight of the approaching loss pressed harder each day as the palace's walls attempted to contain the sadness. However, a far more explosive conflict between Charles and William about who would make the decisions for the monarchy while Catherine was away was developing while her children grieved in private. One is the future, and the other is the monarch. However, Charles and William clashed like fire and thunder on how to handle Kate's crisis. Private notes, tense phone conversations, and even an almost complete walkout. The struggle for authority over the monarchy's future course of action intensified in tandem with Kate's worsening health. Differences in ideology, as well as age, were at the core of the dispute. Charles firmly adhered to the philosophy that Queen Elizabeth had instilled in him, having been influenced by a lifetime of royal restraint and decorum. Never express dissatisfaction or provide an explanation. Silence was strength to him. It was customary to withhold the truth. It was not dishonesty. He was aware that everyone was seeing and analyzing every appearance, every holdup, and every clumsy justification. And he was afraid that keeping quiet might have disastrous consequences. He begged palace advisors to issue a statement for weeks. To be truthful, should give up hiding behind meticulously prepared lines. Transparency was not the only thing that worried him. Trust was at issue. The same audience that had welcomed him and Kate for their forward-thinking strategy was starting to feel duped. William was aware that it might be impossible to restore public trust once it had crumbled. At Balmoral, the line was broken. A summit was described as extremely stressful, urgent, and intimate. Senior aides, Camilla, William, and Charles, don't press. What was supposed to be a strategy session swiftly fell apart despite the lack of cameras. Shouting could be heard reverberating through the ancient stone hallways, according to insiders. Charles was charged by William with prioritizing the monarchy over family. Charles allegedly retaliated angrily, casting doubt on William's emotional intelligence. It was more than just a dispute. It was a clash of generations. According to reports, Camilla, who is typically the strategist, supported Charles. Her stance was obvious. The crown shouldn't seem frail. She advised restraint and prudence. Use caution before speaking. William, however, became even more resentful of her position. He viewed her influence as an impediment rather than a shield. It served as yet another reminder that politics continued to rule the background, even during times of crisis. The leak then appeared. Previously hidden away in private documents, medical memos somehow found their way to the media. The public discovered that Kate's illness was known much earlier than she was acknowledged. Inside the palace, accusations of treachery sprang out. One of the top aides, who had apparently become sympathetic to William's call for transparency, was quietly fired. The barriers were crumbling from the inside out, no longer only shielding secrets. Ultimately, neither side prevailed. With everyone watching, the monarchy could not afford a complete breakup. Thus, a precarious compromise was reached. There would be a joint statement. First to speak, Charles would do it with grace and detachment. William would come next, introducing humanity and feeling. Two voices, one front, one message, based on radically different realities. However, one person was conspicuously missing from the room while the monarchy quarreled about messaging. A lady whose anguish was more profound than blood and whose quiet shouted the loudest. Even though Princess Anne has always been considered as the tough one, nothing could have prepared the palace for the fury she let loose when she discovered how Kate's illness had been treated. For Anne, this was about betrayal, more than it was about family, and she had no intention of remaining silent. What started off as a quiet argument quickly turned into an outright altercation. Anne. She reached her breaking point after discovering that important information about Kate's condition had been purposefully withheld from several senior family members, including herself. She was already irritated by the palace's hesitation and concealment. Years of royal propriety had kept her anger in check, but now it was uncontrollable. She turned to Charles during a high-level meeting in front of the staff and scolded him of being careless. According to reports, she is more than simply your daughter-in-law. You've treated her like a liability despite the fact that she is this family's future. However, it didn't end there. Anne responded quickly and harshly to Camilla's effort to interrupt, claiming to be defending the palace's approach and media management. She is supposed to have said, "This is not your narrative to spin." In a rare moment of public rebellion, she raised her voice. Everything changed in that instant. The palace's already tight atmosphere broke, and Anne's previously silent devotion to Kate turned into a visible fury. Anne had discreetly traveled to the hospital, where Kate was receiving treatment weeks before the public ever found out. There were no security drills or news conferences, just a discreet, low-key visit. According to those close to Anne, she held Kate's hand for almost an hour while neither of them spoke much. Everything was communicated simply by their presence. Anne decided to take action, speak up, and provide protection during this stay. Shortly thereafter, she wrote William a private letter, a warning letter, rather than one of formality. She pleaded with him in it to avoid a repeat of the past. It was a terrifying allusion to what had transpired with Diana decades before. Anne had once witnessed the seclusion, manipulation, and eventual breaking of another woman by silence within the palace. She refused to let Kate suffer the same fate. Her subsequent action was much more symbolic. Beside Kate's hospital bed, Anne put a brooch that had formerly belonged to Queen Elizabeth. It wasn't just regular jewelry either. The late Queen wore it in times of national emergency. It was Anne's way of expressing that this was a crisis as well, and that Kate, like Elizabeth, should not be ignored, but rather viewed as a source of strength. The public was overwhelmingly supportive when word emerged about Anne's behavior, particularly her altercations with Charles and Camilla. For many, she came to represent accountability, truth, and the kind of quiet, unwavering strength that the monarchy had frequently lacked. By remaining steadfast in the face of uncertainty, Anne served as a reminder that not all royals adhere to the script. However, the uncertainty of what Kate's diagnosis was, and why the truth was, still only partially revealed, persisted behind the royal rage and shaky ties. Is it terminal, unusable, a uncommon genetic disorder? The truths that eventually surfaced were far worse than expected, and the public was desperate for explanations. The news had been buried beneath layers of control by the palace, not just postponed. The country would be completely rocked by the reality regarding Kate's health. Nothing could lessen the impact of the official statement, which was released on a calm morning and purposefully timed to miss the evening headlines. Few were ready to hear the palace's confirmation of what many had feared after months of conjecture, rumor, and quiet. Princess Catherine was suffering from a severe neurological condition. At first, it had been mistakenly identified as a mild autoimmune condition, but the truth was much worse. This was not something that could be handled privately or resolved with time. It was forward-thinking. It was intrusive. It was now alarmingly advanced. The length of time the palace had been holding on to the truth was unknown to the general public. Nearly a year before, private experts had voiced concerns behind closed doors. Swiss neurologists who were brought in undercover recommended treatments that might have stopped the decline and called for quick action. Their suggestions, however, encountered opposition. The palace communications team contended that disclosing such private material may cause public anxiety and damage the monarchy's reputation. They lost everything because of that indecision. The opportunity for stabilization vanished along with the window for early therapy. In a last-ditch effort, William and Kate traveled to Germany to get an experimental treatment, a high-risk neuroregenerative therapy that promised promise, but no assurances. The procedure was harsh, intrusive, and ultimately ineffective. Kate had to return to the UK early because her condition deteriorated throughout the trial. The public was never informed about that occurrence. Instead, an ambiguous statement was released by a palace aide. The princess is still sleeping and reacting appropriately. However, she was aware that it was a falsehood. A voice memo was recorded by Kate shortly after her return. Although its existence is now legendary among her crew, it was never meant for public dissemination. "Please," she murmured in the recording, "don't allow them to deceive me. Let my voice speak if this is the truth. Unfiltered, not melted." It was a simple, unvarnished request, filled with terror, dignity, and a clear demand. Don't spin anymore. It was disregarded by the palace. Internally, contradictory medical briefings were given instead. The diagnosis was either misrepresented or kept a secret from even senior royals. Some thought she was afflicted with a stress-related illness. Some believed it to be autoimmune. Oh, phew! If any, they were told the whole truth until it was no longer feasible to hide it. And it wasn't the crown that blinked first when the time finally arrived, when the truth could no longer be postponed. The person was a nurse. The nurse told a journalist about a terrifying night of terror in a devastating anonymous confession. "We didn't think she would survive. Her body simply collapsed. We then waited. She didn't know if she would ever awaken." The illusion of stability was broken more by that moment than by any official letter or press conference. It was now a national tragedy rather than merely a health problem. Nevertheless, Kate never begged for sympathy in spite of everything. She maintained her composure, according to those close to her, even though her body was failing her. She didn't want to be mourned by everyone. She hoped they would listen to her and realize the importance of speaking the truth and the consequences of keeping quiet. However, a startling turn of events occurred just as it appeared like the last chapter had begun. Kate had decided on something, and it went against everything the Crown had anticipated. It was unceremoniously released. No big announcement, not a royal trumpet. It was just a letter, signed in Kate's hand and typed with shaking fingers. A woman confronting the unknown sends one last message, addressing her kids and the world directly. For weeks, the letter had been hidden away, composed in secret, protected by assistants, and discussed behind closed palace doors. When it was released, there was fear, concern that it would cause panic, or worst, sympathy. According to reports, Charles opposed its publishing. William resisted Camilla's warnings about the emotional mayhem it may cause. He maintained that it was Kate's last request and not a decision made by the media. And when the envelope was opened after tense, long nights, the words that followed brought the country to its knees. "I've opted for truth above tradition if you're reading this." Her first words were a subdued protest wrapped in cool candor. Kate destroyed the centuries-old curtain that the monarchs had always used to conceal sadness with that one sentence. She no longer spoke as a future queen, a duchess, or a member of the royal family. She was speaking in a feminine voice, as a spouse, and above all, as a mother. Despite its lack of grandeur, her message to William was heartfelt. You don't have to be powerful, simply be truthful. A call to vulnerability rather than allegiance to the monarchy. Allowing the world to see the fractures because the truth they had been keeping concealed for too long was living there. Only a woman like Kate could have written such a letter, one that was bold in aim yet elegant in tone. Then she wrote the most heartbreaking phrases in her letters to Louis, Charlotte, and George. Every child had direct communication. Every paragraph is written with legacy rather than melancholy. She wrote to George about accountability, resilience, to Charlotte, about joy, to Louis. She assured them that her love would always be there for them, even if she was gone. William remained steadfast, even though the palace had discussed leaving out the children's passages in order to protect privacy. They are entitled to hear her words, because they will require it in the future. A single, impactful sentence that would reverberate across history concluded the letter. In the absence of love, the crown is meaningless. Above all, the sentence revealed the essence of the monarchy and stripped it of its etiquette. Kate was redefining the monarchy rather than challenging it, reminding everyone that the crown was little more than metal and obligation in the absence of empathy and integrity. But with affection, it might develop into something much greater. The letter went viral within hours of its publication. It was read out for entire news cycles. Her last words were cited by world leaders. Schools halted instruction to talk about what it meant. In response, people all over the world lighted candles out of respect rather than sympathy. Once criticized for being too quiet, the woman now spoke louder than the entire organization she represented. The entire world was in mourning. However, something remained absent. One last chapter of unanticipated resilience, optimism, and legacy. A figure, unofficial, unexpected, and nearly forgotten, rose to prominence just as resignation swept the realm. A prominent medical researcher who once refused to serve in the royal family is making a comeback while holding a miracle. Is she the secret to changing Kate's fate? Dr. Eliza Harrow, a pioneer in neuroregenerative medicine and a former royal medical advisor, disappeared from the inner circle of the palace almost 10 years ago, following a public and acrimonious falling out with King Charles. Philosophical disagreements were the excuse given at the time for her departure. However, sources now say it was far more repulsive. Physician, Harrow had opposed intervention, questioned the hierarchy, and charged Charles with allowing protocol to impede advancement. She was quietly banished from royal matters, silenced, and her reputation all but destroyed. Despite the monarchy's rejection of her, she went on to leave a lasting impact. Dr. Harrow has been secretly developing a novel medication in the United States that gave patients with severe neurological disorders that were previously thought to be incurable fresh hope. Initial tests showed promise. It was sound science. However, the treatment was still in the experimental stage and had not yet received UK approval. William was not deterred by that. William secretly contacted Harrow out of desperation and determination. A close assistant arranged for the two to meet in a secluded London apartment, away from palace oversight and under strict protection. Everything was spelled out by Harrow, including the steps, dangers, and unknowns. There was no assurance. However, there was a chance, and it was sufficient for William. A whirlwind of debate ensued. The procedure required evading certain UK health restrictions, even though it was permitted in some areas of the United States. It would require the granting of exceptions in order to proceed. The palace would have to step aside and sign documents. However, not everyone was prepared to take that action. According to insiders, Camilla was furious. According to reports, she cautioned Charles that permitting such a dangerous operation might damage the reputation of the monarchy's stability and power. What if the treatment didn't work? She wondered. How the monarchy would be affected? She referred to it as reckless emotionalism in private discussions. It was obvious what was implied. Even if Kate's struggle was heartbreaking, it shouldn't be made public. However, the public had already made up their mind outside the palace walls. A global outpouring of solidarity followed the release of Dr. Harrow's involvement. Hashtags became popular. Outside the offices of the health ministry, protests gathered. One word turned into a catchphrase. Let Kate make the final decision. Giving a woman who had given everything to the crown the freedom to fight for her life on her terms was more important than medicine. Millions of people signed petitions. Politicians, celebrities, and even ex-royals joined the chorus. From tragedy to defiance, from stillness to insurrection, the story changed course. Once more, the monarchy found itself caught between its image and its humanity. Now that everything is at stake, everyone is holding their breath while they await Kensington's next statement. The masses have assembled. The cameras are in motion. Kensington's windows stay closed. There is only silence and the glow of a lone candle in the corridor, which can be seen from the gates. One thing is certain as Britain waits for a miracle. Nothing will ever be the same in the monarchy. Outside royal homes, the air is thick, with the weight of the collective breath being held, not with ceremony or protocol. Reporters crowd together for tidbits of news as media camps line the pavements in rows, their lights flickering into the night. This moment feels different, even for seasoned journalists who have been numb to royal matters for a long time. There is just waiting. There is no guide or script. The reaction is nothing short of seismic on a global scale. Soft white light illuminates landmarks from Paris to New York. At sunset, cathedral bells softly toll. Presidents, prime ministers, and common citizens from all around the world are sending messages. In UK cities, improvised memorials are sprouting, not for a passing, but for a legacy that is currently precariously precarious. With you is a single phrase that is popular on all social media platforms. Catherine. The silence is terrible inside Kensington's gates. It has been 5 days since William and the kids were last seen. No pictures. Nothing to say. Not even a look. Updates are carefully written by royal aides, stable, hopeful, and resting. However, none provide the answers that the public so badly seeks. Will she make it out alive? And in greater depth? If she does not, what will happen to the family? However, something else is developing in the lack of solutions. Devotion, not skepticism. Thousands of letters, some from young children and others from old people who witnessed her wedding years ago, pour into the palace mailroom. In remembrance, artists create murals. There are silent periods in schools. Churches are open for prayer 24/7. The country is no longer merely observing. It is grieving in a proactive, group, and preventative manner. And something unsaid starts to take hold in the midst of the sadness, a realization that, despite its long history, the monarchy has never existed. A lady who was loved, not because she was perfect, but because she was human, is engaged in a conflict that the crown is unable to stop. The idea of strength itself is also becoming more hazy, as is the distinction between royal and genuine. We appreciate you watching, and we hope to see you in the future one. Please remember to like and subscribe.